Yes. Okay, thank you. Closer. I hate when the mic is too close, so I'll just get it. My name is Ann Hill. I'm from Alphie Training. I invited the best people I could imagine to give a panel about leadership training, and they all said yes. So I'm going to do a brief introduction of each person on the panel, and then they're going to tell you a little bit more about their experience training leaders, developing leaders, creating a succession plan in companies. First, we have one of the advisors of Alphie Training, Professor Tony Graffeo, and he is extremely experienced. He's taught over 1,000 people across the globe how to become leaders. His specialty is taking people who come from a science background and teaching them how to lead and how to develop people. Tony has 40 years of industry experience. He's also a professor at Northeastern University, where he teaches in their leadership program for biotech people. So if you're a biotech scientist and you want to become a leader, you can go learn it from Tony, or you can learn a little bit today. Next we have Bob Kulhan. Bob is probably like the coolest kid on the block. He comes from Second City in Chicago, and he has a 20-year consultancy called Business Improv, where he uses improv to teach people how to lead better, how to work better, how to move organizations forward. I would love to read every company you work with, Bob, but it's a lot. But it includes the New York Red Bulls, Procter & Gamble's R&D University, Starwood Worldwide, the U.S. Department of Defense. In the biotech space, AZ, GSK, BMS, AbbVie, Takeda, Amgen, the National Cancer Institute, the NIH, so a few places. Thank you for being here, Bob.
Thank you.
Leslie Mason is the Director of Training at Sage Therapeutics. She has a 25-year industry in sales training and sales. Previously, she was at Biogen, where she created consistent measurement across the organization in training, and is responsible for pretty much everything training at Sage. They just had a launch, so Leslie is a true trooper despite incredible
Actually, we launched in 2 weeks.
2 weeks, sorry.
And she's here.
And
we're
approved. So,
we're approved.
with a really, I might say, a groundbreaking therapy for postpartum depression, which is amazing. Next we have Michael Young, and Michael also has incredible 40 years of experience in life sciences training. He had marketing roles at SmithKline before the merger. Pfizer, Bayer, Burroughs Wellcome before GSK, back when it was Burroughs Wellcome, so GlaxoSmithKline, Burroughs Wellcome. And Lincoln Pharmaceuticals, Eisai, and he was president of North American operations at Eisai. And we have John Constantine, who some of you possibly might know. He was president of LTEN for 2 years. John brings 30 years of life sciences experience at GSK. At Merck, he was executive director of the Polytechnic Institute. And these bios are so impressive that my head's swimming a little bit. But John, as many of you know, has 24 years in lean development, and he has many other presentations throughout the years at LTEN. You may have seen it before. So I'm going to pass it over to you all to talk a little bit about yourself and your perspective on training leaders. Thank you.
Yes. Do I need this? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, you can. I guess the best way to start is to say that I get into the leadership development business late in my life. I've basically been a managing director and senior vice president. I managed Arthur D. Little's life sciences business for a number of years, so I'm kind of a line manager rather than a trainer. But my personal story is such that I'm a PhD scientist. I get into management early in my career. I was reasonably successful in spite of myself, to the point where all of the faults associated with being a technical guy, I was one of them. I was fortunate enough back earlier in my career, I was about my mid-30s, where back then they called them organizational development managers, not leadership, not learning and development managers, but I was fortunate enough to have somebody take me under his wings, Bill Hitt, and he basically taught me the concepts of leadership, and he literally changed my mind about how I was doing things. And I have to tell you that there was no question about it. My career skyrocketed after a year with this guy. I finally made the transition from all about me to all about we, and how the only way that I could get leverage and really make a big impact in an organization is to continually develop people. And all of a sudden I took pride in how many people were successful rather than how much I was successful. It took a long time, and although I was smart, I was pretty ignorant in the subject, but I really got to the point where it accelerated my career. And then I left corporate America. I thought I was going to retire. I decided that I knew too much, and I wanted to pass it on, like Bill had passed it on to me, and I decided to get into this business to see whether or not I could take younger scientists, engineers, at any level within the company, and try to teach them what Bill had taught me. And that's when I started my company. I was fortunate enough that the Emir of Kuwait, believe it or not, because I was working at Patel at the time, called me in to help develop a strategic plan. As you're well aware, those countries in the Middle East are resource-based, and they wanted a long-term plan. How do we go from a resource-based economy to a knowledge-based economy? And in order to do that, they had to develop their scientific capability. And they did have an institute there, and they brought me there, and I spent 8 years with this institute to try to develop leadership of their site. They have about 900 PhDs to develop leadership in technology areas. I spent 8 years there. I literally developed a curriculum. We called it Kisser University, 5 different courses, 50 emerging leaders. And fortunately, since it was over there, they allowed me to take all of that I developed back to the United States. And that's the resources and the products that I have now that I am teaching locally. I'm starting in Northeastern. I have a few clients right now that I just got started with this year. So that's my background. That's what I want to do. It gives me pleasure to work in this area. And I hope that we can work with some of you at some point in the future.
Excellent. Do I need this?
Yes.
All right, then I guess I'll use it. Okay, so I'm a 25-year vet in improv. I still continue to perform, as will everybody who works for my company, Business Improv. It is a 20-year-old consultancy. I'm adjunct at Columbia Business School as well as Duke, Fuqua. And I'm going to borrow Tony's phrase here because I love it. It's all about we, and that's what we put into place with Business Improv. We create culture and people that focus on each other, foster talent through communication. We create cultures of acceptance in which people are open to ideas before we shoot them down, before we edit them. Get people not afraid. We take the barriers to communication, creativity, collaboration, adaptability, change. We show people on a step-by-step basis how to use intensive improvisation to remove those barriers, to get people talking with each other. Regardless of what side of the brain you think you're on, we are all still in people businesses, and we have to talk with each other. Our experience is pretty extensive, in so much that I was just reminded with Tony that the program he developed, Business Improv, is now in Kuwait. We've done 2 years in a row there, and we're already on track to do our 3rd this year. And we travel globally doing this with all sorts of people and different mindsets.
It pays to have clients with deep pockets.
It does pay to have clients with deep pockets, it's true. What we'd love to do is make an impact, make a difference, show people how to use this on their own terms so that ultimately it's sustainable.
Awesome. Hi everyone, thanks for sticking with us at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday. This is like the yay. This is where you guys go, yay, yes! Yes. I'm Leslie. I am the head of commercial training at Sage Therapeutics. We're a startup. So I've been with the company a year and a half. I was employee number 150. We just hired our 700th employee in a year and a half. So that's how quickly we've grown. And we were growing everything with us at the same time. So one of the things that I'm going to steal from you is around culture. We kind of live and breathe our values and our norms, and our culture is very important to us. We like to say that we're going to do things differently, and at Sage we truly do. We kind of put people first. We live our core values, which is putting people first. It's doing big. It's being accountable. It's growth through learning and change, and it's work fun. And like for me to rattle off 5 core values at the top of my head, that's how much we live and breathe them. And any company that has growth through learning and change as a core value was a company I wanted to work for. And it was one where I wanted to put my mark and really help build the culture of learning, as well as leadership development. we're in the process of like going we're still like, we call ourselves still pre-commercialization. We have a commercial field force, we just hired them all. We just went through 2 rounds of training with them, 2 live meetings, January, March. In 2 weeks we have our launch meeting. So we are like in the process of building everything, and leadership development is near and dear to my heart. It's near and dear to a lot of people in commercial training's heart. And it's near and dear to kind of how we want to do things a little bit differently at Sage to make it a little more special. So, you guys have a mic.
We have a mic. Thanks for offering it.
I know.
Nice of you to share.
I always
So my name is Michael Young, and despite the auspicious introduction there, I really feel like the junior member on the team here. I have to say that, thinking of some song lyrics from back when, I know it's late, I know you're weary, I know your plans don't include me. So it's really nice to be here and have a chance to share, because despite the massive amount of experience here, for you guys, I anticipate that what's most important is recent understanding and how we apply all of this. And so really what I'm here to try and contribute on this committee is an understanding of really how we are living in so much more of a globalization scenario than we ever were before. What each of you do has application to so many other things in what seems to be a much smaller world, largely because of the internet. I also think that this is very much so, in terms of leadership, a matter of expectations. And it's a matter of expectations to the teams we lead, but it's also a matter of expectations for ourselves in terms of understanding what we're capable of doing and what is left to be undone and for which we need help. So currently I serve in a role as the Chief Marketing Officer for Science Media, which is essentially a company that is very devoted to understanding clinical topics and the clinical underpinnings of doing the kinds of life science work that we do. In that, it's very big about expectations, and I hope to be able to share with you some of the innovations that we've run into as an organization, but also with regard to the rest of the world. Understanding what's happening in terms of the expectations of patient-centric needs out there, and how our leadership fits into that. We as an organization of LTEN, as well as certainly in our own individual leadership roles, have to be thinking about our end user customers, and those are the patients. So again, lots of experience here on this panel, but hopefully what we'll be able to convey for you over the next few minutes here is really more about how we apply that.
Thanks, Mike. I'm John Constantine. I've been involved with LTEN for, my name tag thing is getting very long. But I've been 30 years in the industry, and I've had the pleasure of having roles in just about every part of a pharma company. I think the only job I haven't had in a pharma company was on a manufacturing line. So I've done training in each of those: HR, IT, sales, marketing, market research, R&D. But something that Tony said, really, I decided to give a couple of observations with. Last 10 years, most of the last 10 years, I've spent a lot with clinical and medical people who do quality and highly technical work. And I've made some observations about leaders in those areas. First of all, with technical people, not only is leadership acumen not in their DNA, they've spent most of their lives running away from it. And therefore, you don't have really a vetting and selection process mostly in these technical groups. You end up getting the best players as coaches, and what you end up with is player coaches, not managers, not leaders. So that's one thing that we could all do better at in the technical field. Second observation is, someday I'm going to scientifically prove this. I'm going to write a paper on it, but right now it's just an observation, that leadership is, if not a root cause, very, very close to the root stem of many, many business problems. And I'll just give you an example. With inspection findings in clinical trials, if you look at FDA or any agency data across the world for the last 15 years, the same top 10 things happen in the same order, the same frequency, same mode, same everything despite the billions that we spend trying to train those things out of the system, those errors out of the system. And I'm convinced one of the reasons is because when people make these mistakes, nothing happens to them. There's no accountability, no leadership. It's a lack of management because the people in the technical capacities managing the monitors are not holding people accountable, and that's a key part of leadership. So that's
You put a CAPA in place and it goes away.
it goes away till the next time it happens.
Exactly.
Yes.
There's always room for another kappa.
Okay, so we're just going to go to questions. If at any time you have an urgent question that you want to ask the panel, just raise your hand and I'll come to you with the mic.
Ian, can I interrupt you for just a second?
Yes, you may.
I think it's important to give some recognition to Ann Hill. She put this together. I'm privileged to be on her board of directors. She's just started a new company, Alphie Training. It's a terrific product. You ought to take a look at it, get down to the booth and check it out. I want to give her a plug. Outstanding work. I mean, she reviewed my latest book, my ebook, and while I'm not the greatest writer in the world, I thought I was pretty good. She bled all over this. My product is 100% better after she got through with it, and I thought it was pretty good. So I wanted to give a plug for her.
All right, so let's get started with some questions. Thank you, Tony. So the learning objectives for this, the 3 topics we're going to try to cover are succession planning in your organization, creating a leadership pipeline of leaders, and the different training modalities, identifying the best training modality. And you all have a weird worksheet on training modalities. That's also meant for you, for yourself, to kind of like think about what do we use? What are we already using in our organization? So the first question for the panel is on succession planning, and it's how closely should leadership selection and training be aligned with succession planning? And we don't have to go down the line if anybody wants to jump in.
Yeah, the selection process, it's not just the selection process, it's the whole vetting process of how you identify people with the acumen to be managers. It's very rare you get the best player on any team to be the best manager. It's exceedingly rare. So if you think of in a sales force, how often do you have your perennial leader's edge, or whatever award you call it, award winner, get promoted into management and be successful? It's not often. If you really think about it, it's not that often. It's usually that top third solid performer who's got the acumen for, and the sales forces, especially in the US, the sales forces tend to be much better at this selection and vetting process. In the technical areas, they're much less good at it.
I'll piggyback on that from like the commercial side of it. This is critical for us, really having a seat at that table and developing kind of the succession plan and developing the competencies of what we want our leaders to be, the competencies that we want them to strive to be, and then developing, those skills and the training to allow people to have that development to become really good leaders. So for us on the commercial side of it, it goes hand in hand. And we ensure that you as an individual contributor, if you're going to become our bench for our leaders, we want to make sure that we're giving you all the right skill set to do that. And so, making sure that they have the right training, that they have the right skills, that they have the opportunity to even practice it in a safe environment. So there's different ways that we can do that, and there's different ways that I've done that in the past, trying to build it in the future. But I think, to your point, John, it's something that isn't consistent across even your own companies. I saw that at larger companies that I've been at, where you have what's one way of doing something for a commercial side of the business that isn't even thought of, and sort of that other side of the wall side of the business. So like R&D would never even think to create simulations, or never even think to create kind of opportunities for their individual contributors to have that skill set. So I think you'll find like variances even within your own organization of kind of succeeding in this area.
I cannot agree more with what I'm hearing so far, especially creating an environment for practice, the opportunity for growth, a learning curve, that understanding that we all need that space and that place to fail strategically, fail early, get notes, get coaching notes, create essentially a culture that allows this to take place. Not only allows it, encourages it to take place. And so it has the rituals, the routines, the practices, the language accountability practices, a way to communicate this front and backwards, support collateral. It's imperative.
I want to kind of talk to you as an audience that basically, I think that this is a real opportunity for the learning and development folks to really have a bigger impact on your organization. I really believe this. As a managing director, I charge my HR people. I want to have a succession plan. I want to know for every leadership position that we have, and this isn't just line management, this is project management, this is key technical leadership. I want to list in every single leadership position that if they left tomorrow, our performance would drop significantly. That's really the criteria of leadership. If they leave tomorrow, our performance would drop significantly. And I want to come up with a plan where we have at least one ready now candidate to take their place. That's number one on succession plan. Secondarily, if you don't have one ready now, you've got one ready now, one ready with training. If you've got somebody that's close, they're going to need this training to get to the next level. And if you don't have that, I want you to develop a taxi squad. I want to know who out there in the community, and my competitors and my clients or whatever, that could fill this role, and I want to meet them, and I want to meet them now to let them know that sometime in the future I want them to work for me. So it's constantly worried about whether or not if anybody left my organization, I can replace them immediately with somebody else. A good analogy is a football analogy. You know, in football, there's 22 positions, and they always talk about ready now, next man up. Why? Because when somebody leaves, you have to replace that person now, not a day from now, a week from now. In some cases, as you know, in technical organizations, it takes 6 to 9 months to replace people. 6 to 9 months where that position is unfilled and the productivity goes down. So I use that football analogy a lot. Okay, that's the reason why they always have a backup and a backup. They got 2 or 3 guys. You think about that in your business. So I think as leadership and developing people, what I would suggest is that if you don't already have a copy of the succession plan, ask for it. If they don't have one, if your organization doesn't have one, start developing it. Okay, and you don't have to do it the way I've asked people to do it, but I strongly suggest that you think about, do we have a ready now candidate? If not, do we have a candidate that would be ready with training? And this is a contribution that you can make to your line management big time in terms of adding value to your company.
So I'll just add one quick note here, and that is that many of you in the audience here don't have an overall corporate responsibility for succession planning. A lot of you are looking at specific departments. I think a lot of what Tony talked about is very appropriate. I like to think about it like shark's teeth. If you are familiar with the way sharks have their teeth, the first row is the one they're chewing on today. But you've always got to have at least another row or 2 coming behind that are going to be able to replace that. They may not be quite as sharp, they may not be quite as large yet, but they're the ones that you're going to grow to bring forward. And it's looking for those lines to go through there. I started today talking a little bit about expectations, and those expectations drive back to what does good look like. So when you are looking at the dentition of your department, okay, and how those shark teeth are going to come forward, remember what good looks like. Is it the functionality of how it's going to chew? Is it the functionality of the targets that you're going after to go bite? What is it that's going to help define what good looks like? And that will help align those teeth in a way that will bring them forward in the way that you need them. So I'm the king of bad analogies, but that's one that I use, okay?
We've got sports, we've got nature, we've covered it all. That's good. So we're going to do these questions, one for each learning objective, so that we cover all the learning objectives. So this is the next question on the leadership pipeline. True or false, 70% of leadership success is based on who the person is, the leader trainee selection process. In other words, it's kind of leaders are born or leaders are made is the underlying question sometimes.
I want to throw it out to y'all. What do you think the right answer is here?
That's a facilitator skill, right?
Isn't that, I think it just break that on you. Okay. So I'm going to go to you then to answer. I don't like this microphone.
Yeah, there's a little bit of static. I certainly don't believe that it's a 70% of leadership success is based on the leader training. I think that's a little high. I think it's dependent, right? I think you can have somebody that, the great analogy of, you take a successful salesperson and put them in a leadership role and they can fail miserably. So the selection process obviously is very critical in terms of aligning it to what those competencies are, or what success looks like from a leadership perspective in your organization. And just as you said, ready with training, I think that you can build those skills for certain people that have the core aspects of what you're looking for in a leader. I think you could develop some of those as well. So I don't think it's a full-on, naturally born situation. Some have it too, and they just don't choose this path. They don't want to lead people. They have strong leadership skills, but they choose another path for what they want to do. But I think it's a little, I'd say, 70%.
Thank you. Does anyone have the opposite point of view? By the way, this stat comes from a survey of CEOs, and they said 70% of it is just the right person, just picking the right person. You can't train them all. So
We could do much better.
The other thing I was going to add was that if we each described one of the best leaders we ever worked under, they would all be different people. They would all have different personalities. And just thinking in my career, some of the people I worked for, they could be wildly different, but they brought different talent sets forward, and they were great leaders.
Yes, and the selection process is all about acumen. So acumen is the sort of innate ability to do something. Having the acumen doesn't necessarily mean you can throw somebody over the fence and they'll be an awesome leader at day one. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of development that goes into that. But the selection process is really important. IBM had a really good idea for many years with the assessment centers they had. When people would go, you go through a boot camp, and if you passed, you just waited for your turn. And if you didn't pass, okay, you go back to your old job. Most companies don't do them anymore, probably because it's impractical to bring people in, and it's expensive, but it's worth it. And I've actually, we didn't have a corporate one years ago when I was a district manager, so we did one in our own region. We just did it amongst ourselves. And I remember this one guy, we put these people through the ringer. They had to do presentations. They had to go in front of all of us. They were nervous. And at the end of the process, at the end of the week, this one guy, his lip was trembling, and he was fighting back tears. And he didn't know how to say this. He goes, but I just realized I don't want to be a manager. And everybody was gasping. And I applauded him. I actually said, this is a good outcome for that assessment center. We didn't put the wrong person in the role. And it was his realization. We didn't have to hit him over the head with it. He realized it himself. That was really good.
I'll tell a quick, I think you brought up a great point that if we all talked about who was our top leader, and we all would have different people that we would say, or different characteristics. For me, it's about fellowship. It's a great leader creates great fellowship. It's the person you would follow from company to company, that you would literally walk to the ends of the earth for that person. That person really, you walk through fire to help them succeed, and they are the person that makes you look good. It's not about making yourself look good as a leader, it's about making your team look really good as a team. And that's that fellowship. And I think you bring up some really great points about, people recognizing that they may never want to be a manager. And that's okay. I mean, I hired someone on my team who was a former MSL, and I recognized in her that she could make that transition into a commercial world. And now she's kind of looking at it going, well, where do I go from here? I don't want to be a manager. She goes, I don't ever want to be a first-line leader. And I'm like, go back and be a medical director. There's so much that she could do, but she in her own mind recognized that she never wanted to lead people. She's like, I hate your job. I would hate what you have to do. And it takes it takes a different type of skill set to like deal with all the other stuff that goes along with being a really good leader. Because it's not just about coaching or mentoring, it's about a whole slew of other things. And you have to manage up and manage down and manage sideways and manage around. And it's really creating that, like, at the end of the day, I want someone to say, I'd walk through fire for her. Because that makes me then a really good leader.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Everybody's style is different. So for us, I was reflecting back to what you said before. Really, I've made myself redundant in my own organization at least 13 times over. And there's one individual from this conversation that I keep thinking about, because I put him into a senior position, and he came to me and said, I don't want to be client facing. I want to be on set. I mean, I'll be on site running the programs, that type of client facing, absolutely. I don't want to go through development sessions. I don't want to have these programs. And so we had a very long conversation about what he wants. And from that, he became the head of our virtual instructor-led training, our VILT program. So we found a place for him to continue to grow and push himself that is unique, not only to us in the organization, it's unique to anybody doing improv. So yeah, I think it's about finding the right people to do the right things and then celebrating their diversity, their uniqueness.
Well, I can give you a couple of personal examples. First of all, I think that the selection process is extraordinarily important. I believe, John, not necessarily that the person is a natural born leader, but the person has the potential to become one. That's the important part. I like to tell people that, when you look to hire somebody or you look to promote to somebody, most people ask the obvious question, can they do the job? And they look at experience and resume and track record, and they do all the homework that they do, okay? And that's good. The only mistake that I'd say some people make there is they take a look at some people who they think have 10 years worth of experience, and they really have 1 year's worth of experience 10 times. Be careful of that. It happens to a lot of people. Okay? But having said that, that's not usually the determining criteria whether you've made a successful hire. I've made some real doozy hires. I mean, real big mistakes in my career. I'm embarrassed to say that, but I did. I've also made some extraordinary hires. And what I found out over the years is that it's not only important to get that first question checked off, can they do the job? The most important question is, will they do the job? And that has everything to do with motivation, willingness to have a growth mindset, or if you know about the static or growth mindset, their willingness to develop, humility and a standpoint of what I like to call healthy self-confidence. And what I mean by healthy self-confidence is these people know what they know, and they know what they don't know, and they are willing to ask questions and learn. That's a healthy self-confidence. You look for that in leaders, okay? As opposed to arrogant people. And I say most of the mistakes that most businesses made are usually based on either ignorance or arrogance. One of those two. So I think the selection process deals with will they do the job, attitude, mindset, philosophy. And when I evaluate people, I do that right now for my clients, is I will go through an assessment where it's not just the personality. I mean, you can do a DISC test, you can do a lot of good tests, but you have to go deeper than that. You have to really find out, what their self-esteem is all about, what drives them, what motivates them. And I've written a book called Three-Dimensional Leadership. It's actually a college textbook that I wrote on leading biotech companies. It's very expensive. I teach to my graduate students. I decided to put together a small ebook. It's called Becoming a Three-Dimensional Leader, because I wanted to get more reach. It's like $15 on Amazon. By the way, I have copies of it down at Ken's booth. If anybody's interested in a copy, I'll give it to you free. Okay? It's called Becoming a Three-Dimensional Leader. And the reason why I think this is important for the selection process. I really believe that there are 3 dimensions to leadership, and one of them is the strategic development. There are some people that are strategic leaders. They are always in the future as a dimension. They're always thinking ahead. How can I make my company better? How can I do things cheaper, faster? They're never satisfied with the status quo. They're always concerned about the future. And they think differently, they act differently. And then you have the performance leader. The performance leader is more like the common thought you think of as a manager, you know, like they get things done. You give me something, I'm getting it done. If you're in the military, you want me to take that hill, I'll take it. Strategic leader might say, are we sure that's the right hill to take? They think a little bit differently, as opposed to, I'm going to take that hill come hell or high water. And then, of course, the third dimension is servant leadership. We've all, I mean, that's kind of the common thing that everybody's teaching, emotional intelligence, great stuff, you know, emotional intelligence, servant leadership, you should have that. That's the only way you can basically leverage yourself. But understanding where your strengths are in terms of strategic leadership, performance leadership, or servant leadership goes a long way to determining what assignments you should take on, who you hire, what positions you put people in. There's a lot of insights in the book that I'd love for you to tackle. Okay? So I really believe that the selection process is an extraordinary part of the whole succession planning process. Because one of the things I will say that, you know, there are too many, and I really believe this strongly, there are too many smart and immature people in positions of leadership. And it's unfortunate. Those are not the people that belong there. I would rather have a person that's moderate intelligence, but is mature and has a healthy self-confidence. Those are the people I want to follow.
All right, so we're going to go to the next question. If anybody has any questions for the panel, feel free.
Do you notice a difference in developing leaders on the commercial side versus the science side?
I love that
That's a great question.
Yeah, you just stepped into something right there.
I love that question.
If you knew me, that
Yes, no, there is. So there's a huge difference, and it has to do with the population you have at hand. So when I go into a client and I look at, I always proactively look at leadership issues being root cause of some of the reasons why they're bringing me in. And typically in the pharma business, life science in the U.S., they've done a pretty good job of vetting and developing their first-line managers. There's a pretty strong recognition that that's the number one point of value in a corporation in terms of revenue. And the technical, I mean, especially some of these big technical organizations, you know, Merck had 14,000 people in R&D, so you can figure they probably had somewhere around 1,500 to 2,000 managers. You can't just go in and wipe out all the managers, fire them all, and hire new ones. It doesn't work that way. So you have to sort of deal with what you have, and that's where the development comes in, and then sort of chip away at the bottom of the barrel as best you can. You have to have a different expectation. To take a couple of people who have gone through assessment centers in the sales force and developing them, that's pretty easy. Taking a couple of people who struggled through playing and coaching at the same time for 15 years and trying to make them even, your expectation of how far they move is going to be a lot smaller.
So to follow up, then how do you build a program that's synergistic across organizations so you don't have two different leadership systems, but deal with different learners and people in such different places?
So we struggled with that at Biogen, and we looked at that and thought, how do we do exactly that? How do we take what has been done in commercial that has sort of become like standard? You know, as a commercial person all my life, you're used to training. You're used to going to a national sales meeting. You're used to being put to the screws and being assessed and certified and having to prove your value. And R&D wasn't like that. You had a task to do, and others on the GXP side, you had an SOP. You had to follow that procedure to the limit. And if you didn't, or if a mistake was made, it would be caught, but then like a remediation plan would be put into place. And so, to John's point, it's a very different mindset. And so when I kind of came into an enterprise position, I had to look at it and say, like, what are we doing? Like, how do we fix this? And so we at Biogen kind of fixed it in a two-prong approach. We took what we counted as foundational learning. So this was everything that a leader needed to have. So it would be things like DISC or social styles. How do you talk to someone who is completely the opposite of you? Like, I am a driver. I will get bored in the details. You just better bottom line it for me. But I had people on my team that were like all about the details and all about the process and have to really think through this. And you have to learn how to be able to flex and adjust. So we kind of like looked at what is it that you need as a foundational person to even just start to have a leadership type conversation, a performance conversation. What does feedback mean? So feedback type of foundational training. Not every opportunity is a feedback opportunity. When is it appropriate to give feedback? When is it inappropriate to give feedback? How do you deliver that feedback? How do you not deliver that feedback? It was things that seemed so basic that we needed to go back down to the basics. And that was what became sort of everybody, like we regrounded everyone in the organization, no matter what. And then we said, okay, now that we've regrounded, how do we now do pillars for the different departments? And where do we cross over? And so the pillars that we had in commercial, there might be crossover into R&D, there might be crossover into medical, and vice versa. How do we take some of the strict processes that exist in R&D and the strict processes that exist in clinical development and bring some of those into a commercial world in terms of like leadership and things like that? How do we make that be successful? And in R&D and in different areas, they do like daily scrum meetings, daily like after action reviews. If something goes wrong, how do we fix it? How do we change it for the next day? Well, we brought that process over to the commercial side. You're in a field coaching report. Something goes wrong on that call. How do you fix it? How do you make sure that that rep doesn't do the same exact thing the next time? So it's finding those nuances, which can be tough, and you have to get like kind of involvement of everybody to agree that that's the approach you took. That's one way we did it. I don't know if anybody has other opinions on it. Oh, you have one right there.
Oh, yeah.
I'm in the middle. This is like awkward. With microphones.
Well, since I was in the R&D business, my approach to leadership was a little bit different, and that is that I do think you teach leadership different to the R&D folks than you do to the commercial folks. Not only because the people are different, the culture is different, I think the metrics are different. What I wanted my leaders, my technical leaders to do is, I wanted them to be able to generate and sell their ideas. And after all, if you're in R&D, you're in the innovation business, okay? You're not in the marketing and sales, you're in the innovation business. So, if you're in a business, you're in a commercial business, you want to be considered a moneymaker. You want to be the type of person that, does one of three things, okay? You either help the company increase revenues, help the company reduce costs, or help the company minimize risk. If you're not doing one of those three things, why are you getting paid? Okay? So from that standpoint, you got to get across to technical people that you have to be able to generate and sell your ideas. That's a very important leadership function of the R&D part of the organization, or the technical experts part of the organization. Now here's the rub. Okay, John pointed this out. Here's the rub. We're not trained that way. We go to graduate school. We learn the scientific method. You come up with a hypothesis. My job is to poke as many holes in that hypothesis as possible for as long as I can, because I'm not going to believe that's in theory until I've exhausted all possible ways to completely and totally shoot that idea down. How does that work in a company when you're trying to innovate? We're trained just the opposite way of innovating. Now, from a scientific method point of view, it's worked. It's worked for centuries. It's a good idea. We don't want theories to be half-baked. We want them challenged. But when you're in an organization, how do you get the mindset to shift? When you get to be a division director, you get to be a vice president of R&D, that's where the mindset has to be. Look at, my job is to bridge the cultural gap between commercial and technology. That's my job. My job is to come up with ideas, my job is to generate ideas, and I've got to sell them to the commercial side and get that feedback. So that's like an important part of leadership training that I think the technical people need. The commercial people don't need that. The technical people need that. I think also you talked about leading projects. You can send a lot of people through project management course. I mean, everything's done through projects. We know that. That's how you get things done. You send a lot of people through, whether they have PMBOK training, whether they have project management, they know everything about work breakdown, structures, critical path. They know the science of project management. How many of them know the art of leading a project rather than managing a project? How many of them know, I've got three stakeholders in this project. I've got to satisfy my client, hopefully super please them, but I've got a boss that I have to satisfy too. And those two are not necessarily on the same page. As if that isn't bad enough, I've got a whole staff of people that have their own agenda. I've got to balance the needs of all three of those critically important stakeholders, and I've got to do it in a way that in the beginning of the project, we're all on the same page. And as you know, as soon as the project starts, crap happens. You got to change your plan. So I love the Mike Tyson quote that says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. I love that quote. Because whenever you're running a project, something happens that it's going to change. Whenever it changes during the execution of a project, the first thing you think of as a leader is, how is it affecting my client? How is it affecting my boss? And how is it affecting my staff? And what can I do to rebalance it? Nobody teaches that in project management school. And last but not least, in project closure, how do you close out a project properly? Management wants you to close it out in a certain way. There's a lot of paperwork that needs to be done. There's a lot of lessons learned that need to be written, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the first aspect of leadership is generating and selling your ideas. The next is really knowing how to lead a project, especially not only a cross-functional project, which is across all kinds of the organizational barriers, but a cross-cultural project. You get a team that has a marketing manager and a line manager and an R&D guy. That's not only a cross-functional project, that's a cross-cultural project. So teaching people how to manage cross-cultural projects is very important. And I'd say last but not least is the whole issue of supervising staff. Like you say, there are just some people that dread it. And it's really unfortunate. That's where I love the idea of, if someone has the potential of turning their attitude and their philosophy from me to we, they can become great managers. I was a me person until I was about 38. I mentioned that in the beginning, okay? I made that transition. By the way, it wasn't easy. It took about 3 years. But nevertheless, when I made that transition, my career skyrocketed. So the idea about training people, the biggest part about supervision, as you know, is the management by objectives. Everybody hates management by objectives. There are Harvard Business Review articles right now that say that's like passé, you shouldn't do that anymore, one-minute manager. I think it's tragic. That's one of the greatest, Peter Drucker's even said that, one of the greatest tools ever invented in terms of achievement is management by objectives. The biggest problem, it's never been executed properly. Why? The theory's terrific. Why? You ever go to a meeting with your boss and you sit down and talk about next year's objectives? What does your boss usually do? Spends 55 of the 60 minutes telling you what the organization needs from you. And then, oh, by the way, the last 5 minutes, you want to develop something, you got to develop yourself, go take a course. Okay, that's management by objectives. No, that's not. It's no wonder why people aren't engaged. It's no wonder why they hate their bosses. An approach that I like to use, and I've used it in my company, it works, okay, is that you start off a management by objectives project, okay, or an individual in terms of their annual review, their annual performance plan, okay? 50% of the time starts with, what can the company do for you? What I want to know is, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your aspirations? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? By the way, what is it that bothers you? What is it that you don't like to do? I want to know as much about you as possible. And by the way, you do a lot of that beforehand because you're not going to do that in a half an hour. But if you go into that meeting well prepared to understand who that person is and what their strengths and weaknesses are, the second half of the conversation becomes so much easier. By the way, this is what the company needs from you. And given what we know about you right now, maybe we can direct you in a way that we can apply your strengths. Maybe you shouldn't be doing this. By the way, that weakness of yours, we need you in this role. Maybe we can shore up that weakness with you. We'll give you some help in that area. How much better is a performance plan? How much better would you feel in a performance plan when you get out of a meeting with a supervisor for an hour? And then, by the way, if that supervisor spends 1 hour a month with you, whether it's dinner, or whether it's a lunch, or just a meeting, kind of saying, okay, by the way, I had my manager's hat on about a month ago when we talked about your plan, but I don't need that anymore. You're an independent knowledge worker. We know what you want. We know what the company needs to do for you. We know what you need to do for the company. My job now is to put on my servant leader hat. Okay? By the way, how's it gone this month? Any barriers?
Tony, I'm going to do a time check. We've got 10 minutes left.
Okay,
so let's
sorry.
move to the next question. That was a great question. If you missed the question, it was,
how can you do leadership training that's both for the commercial and the R&D side of the organization? What is the difference between training leaders on those two sides of the fence?
Okay, thanks for keeping me under control.
So the next question is about training modalities, and when we talked to prepare for this about all the different ways that you can train, and we kind of give you a laundry list in your worksheet if you grab one. One of the things that Leslie brought up is that the most important thing is that you have to have a culture where learning is thought of as a normal part of daily life. So Leslie, I don't know if you'd like to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to make sure that any approach that you take regarding kind of leadership training and developing the leaders in your organization, that you have the leaders of your organization bought into that. And you can't get anywhere without that. And it does truly stem from above. So it really does start at that CEO level. And if you don't have access to the CEO, find out who's the next below that person, who is the D in all of this. Because there is someone that is the D in all of this that is at that highest level that you need to ensure that you have that culture of learning. I'm lucky that we have it as a core value that I just get to go back to the wall and go, see, look, it's right here on the wall. We grow through learning and change, and you want me to do big, so I'm going to do it this way. If you don't have that, or if you have a leader that hasn't bought into the core values that they're speaking, find the person next in line to that person who has that decision-making power, and really sell them on what that culture and cultivate of learning is. And the different modalities really play into what we all know as trainers of that sort of adult learning principle. It's not the one-size-fits-all. And it can be the one-size-fits-all at a foundational level, but then how do you customize it so that it feels like, hey, this leadership development program was tailored for me, Leslie Mason. And this one is focusing on my strengths, and there is opportunity for me to develop this skill set that I need to here at the organization. And if it's not here, they've pointed me in the right direction to find it. And I think that's critical and key.
So, if you don't mind, I'll just add a comment first, and that is that relative to the comments I made about expectations, again, this is really driving from the top in terms of what your leadership is expecting from the team. And if there is a culture of continuous learning and a culture of continuous improvement, then part of that is your ticket as learning and development people to seize on that and make that a part of really the baseline offering within that company. That then lends itself to a tremendous number of other avenues and opportunities from that, not the least of which is partnering opportunities. So when you think about the way in which your companies will align with other collaborating companies or co-development companies or co-promotion companies, that leadership potential and that leadership call to have continuous learning needs to be aligned on both sides of those organizations. The same thing in terms of recruitment. So it lends itself to recruitment capabilities too when you have that opportunity, that individuals that come in, when they get hired, they know they're that third row of teeth, but they've got an opportunity to get to the front of that bite, okay?
So one thing about the culture is if you think back to an awesome leader that you work for, there's always that sort of mystique or aura about them that, how do they know so much? How do you know that person? You don't even work with them. So I'm not a big business book person, sorry, Tony. But one of the old time books that has always stuck with me is Peter Senge's Fifth Discipline. And can anybody tell me what the fifth discipline is? Everybody forgets. That's the most important one.
Synthesis, was it? Or?
Systems thinking.
Systems thinking.
Systems thinking. And it's the one where we're the worst at. And if you can build systems thinking into your leadership programs, it'll do a world of good for those individuals. So, for instance, when I showed up day one at Merck R&D, there was no course on drug development. It was the whole business process is drug development. No courses on drug development. So nobody in the clinical space knew what was going on in research, and vice versa. Actually, people didn't know what happened when you handed off that molecule to the next phase. It just wasn't. It was a bunch of silos and no systems thinking. But even broader beyond that, even people in this commercial organization, they should know what goes on in basic research, what goes on in pharmacovigilance, what goes on in clinical. It's a part of the end-to-end process of the company you work for. And if you can build that into your leaders and then have them then disseminate that throughout the organization, it's really powerful.
For me, this is all about really creating that culture in which we embrace learning. I cannot stress enough the need for it to be top down. If the leaders are not doing this, no one is going to follow this, right? So whatever your onboarding process is, everybody's going to look up the chain to see what everybody else is doing, and that's how we're going to fold in. Because great people think we're going to go into organizations and change an organization, we're going to drive it. The truth of the matter is we adapt to fit inside the culture and the team that already exists because we want to belong, and that's something intrinsic in all of us. So it's about creating not only the foundation for success, the architecture for success. And so for me, a lot of this then is reps. Get your reps in over and over again. Think of the first time you rode a bicycle, think of the 500th time you rode a bicycle, or knife skills in the kitchen, or whatever it is that it just takes reps for you to get comfortable with so that you're not thinking about flavor profiles or how to do a karate move or ride a bicycle. It's all about trying to get the unconscious competence. And so it's going through those levels of competency in a way that allows you to do it. So whether it's that divergent side or just this area of fail early, fail often, it's about getting the reps in. And I want to move backwards to that last question very quickly. Regardless of job function for me, we are all in the people business. And unless you are truly living in a cave or in somebody's basement or something like that, you have to talk with each other. So getting people to understand that is really an investment in human capital. So regardless of what the job function is, we got to talk.
I'll be brief.
We're almost out of time, so I was going to open it to the audience, Tony, to see if we have any questions. Because I want to make sure if somebody had something you wanted to hear about, let's make sure we get it.
If you could briefly talk about, so my company right now, 1,300 or less, but we're being integrated with our parent company, 30,000. Can you talk about the difference that you see in the leadership skills that we're about to face?
That was an easy question.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
John?
I would just say quickly that I've done some of that analysis for companies, and most of the CEOs worry about financial fit and they worry about market fit. They don't spend enough time about cultural fit.
Yes.
And that's when they get in trouble. So you need to find out what's the culture of your company. And even if it's not explicit, there are unwritten rules in most companies. And when you go back to your company, find out what they are. Just pay attention. And the way you do it is like, what behaviors have consequences and what doesn't? And then you'll find out what the unwritten rules are of the organization. So you need to find out what is your culture, what is the culture of the organization that's acquiring you, and find out whether or not there's going to be clashes.
Yeah, with these big mergers, there's so many poor examples of these big mergers, and there are a few good ones. And the few good ones, they got the culture piece right. Somehow they got it right. And it's usually around just picking something to land on. Doesn't matter if it's the best one, just pick something to land on. Don't let these two globs exist side by side for any length of time. You have to make it one new team. It's easier said than done, particularly at our level. We're a little bit low altitude to really affect that, unfortunately. And it's then on the smaller company side, it's sort of getting our colleagues to know when to be a little bit of a disruptor with the new parent company and when to back off and let because the big boy is going to end up winning. So you need to know how far you can go.
And I'll just add one note to that. There is a reason they acquired you, okay? And that's what you want to accentuate. You want to look at what that is. There is a part of that. There's no doubt about it that culture eats strategy for breakfast, okay? So whatever is going to be the predominant culture is what you're going to need to adhere to. ultimately, but there is a reason they acquired you, and if that part you contribute to a better culture for the combined organization, I think that's something you can accentuate.
Yes, and as it is important to look at the differences, it's also important to look at the similarities and build off of those as well, as there will be a need to have a common language and a common understanding of what's going on. So honor and respecting the differences of where we're coming from to get to that common place in the middle.
We're at time. I know there was one more question, but maybe you can come up and ask the panel member. We didn't get to the details of the modalities, but I have the completed answers for you of what our panel thinks are the best uses of each modality. So at the door, if you want to grab one, please come up and say hello. And we're so happy that you joined us so late in the day. Thanks for all the great questions.
Thank you.